The Washington Post is an American daily newspaper. It is the most widely circulated newspaper published in Washington, D.C., and was founded in 1877, making it the area's oldest extant newspaper. Located in the capital city of the United States, the newspaper has a particular emphasis on national politics. Daily editions are printed for the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. The newspaper is published as a broadsheet, with photographs printed both in color and in black and white. The newspaper has won 47 Pulitzer Prizes. This includes 6 separate Pulitzers awarded in 2008, the second highest number ever given to a single newspaper in one year. Post journalists have also received 18 Nieman Fellowships and 368 White House News Photographers Association awards. In the early 1970s, in the best-known episode in newspaper's history, reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein led the American presser investigation into what became known as the Watergate scandal. Reporting in the newspaper greatly contributed to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. In years since, its investigations have led to increased review of the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. In 2013, longtime owners the Graham family sold the newspaper to Jeff Bezos for $250 million in cash. The newspaper is owned by Nash Holdings LLC, a holding company Bezos created for the acquisition. The newspaper is also known as the namesake of the Washington Post March, composed in 1889 by John Philip Sousa. Overview. The Post has distinguished itself through its political reporting on the workings of the White House, Congress, and other aspects of the U.S. government. Unlike the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post does not print an edition for distribution away from the East Coast. In 2009, the newspaper ceased publication of its national weekly edition, which combined stories from the week's print editions. Due to shrinking circulation, the majority of its newsprint readership is in District of Columbia and its suburbs in Maryland and Northern Virginia. The newspaper's weekday and Saturday printings include the following sections. Main section, containing the front page, national and international news, business, politics, and editorials and opinions. Metro section, containing local news. Style section, with feature writing on pop culture, politics, fine and performing arts, film, fashion, and gossip, along with advice columns and comics. Sports section. Classified advertising. Sunday editions largely include the weekday sections as well as Outlook, arts, travel, comics, TV Week, and the Washington Post magazine. The Sunday style section differs slightly from the weekday style section. It is in a tabloid format, and it houses the reader-written humor contest, the Style Invitational. Additional weekly sections appear on weekdays. Health and Science on Tuesday, Food on Wednesday, Local Living on Thursday, and Weekend, with details about upcoming events in the local area, on Friday. The latter two are in a tabloid format. The newspaper is one of a few U.S. newspapers with foreign bureaus, located in Beirut, Berlin, Beijing, Bogota, Cairo, Hong Kong, Islamabad, Jerusalem, Kabul, London, Mexico City, Moscow, Nairobi, New Delhi, Paris, and Tokyo. In November 2009, it announced the closure of its U.S. regional bureaus, Chicago, Los Angeles and New York, as part of an increased focus on political stories and local news coverage in Washington. The newspaper has local bureaus in Maryland and Virginia. As of May 2013 update, its average weekday circulation was 474,767, according to the Audit Bureau of Circulations, making it the 7th largest newspaper in the country by circulation, behind USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Daily News, and The New York Post. While its circulation has been slipping, it has one of the highest market penetration rates of any metropolitan news daily. For many decades, the Post had its main office at 1150 15th Street, Northwest. This real estate remained with Graham Holdings when the newspaper was sold to Jeff Bezos' Nash Holdings in 2013. Graham Holdings sold 1150 15th Street for $159 million in November 2013. The Washington Post continued to lease space at 1150 L Street, Northwest. In May 2014, the Washington Post leased the West Tower of 1 Franklin Square, a high-rise building at 1301 K Street, Northwest in Washington, D.C. The newspaper moved into their new offices December 14, 2015. History. Founding an early period. The newspaper was founded in 1877 by Stilson Hutchins and in 1880 added a Sunday edition, thus becoming the city's first newspaper to publish 7 days a week. In 1889, Hutchins sold the newspaper to Frank Hatton, a former Postmaster General, and Beriah Wilkins, a former Democratic congressman from Ohio. To promote the newspaper, the new owners requested the leader of the United States Marine Band, John Philip Sousa, to compose a march for the newspaper's essay contest award ceremony. Sousa composed the Washington Post. It became the standard music to accompany the two-step, a late 19th century dance craze, and remains one of Sousa's best-known works. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, the Post printed Clifford K. Berryman's classic illustration Remember the Maine, which became the battle cry for American sailors during the war. In 1902, Berryman published another famous cartoon in the Post drawing the line in Mississippi. This cartoon depicts President Theodore Roosevelt showing compassion for a small bear cub and inspired New York store owner Morris Mitchum to create the teddy bear. Wilkins acquired Hatton's share of the newspaper in 1894 at Hatton's death. After Wilkins' death in 1903, his sons John and Robert ran the Post for 2 years before selling it in 1905 to John Roll McLean, owner of the Cincinnati Enquirer. During the Wilson presidency, the Post was credited with the most famous newspaper typo in D.C. history. According to Reason magazine, the Post intended to report that President Wilson had been entertaining his future wife, Mrs. Galt, but instead wrote that he had been entering Mrs. Galt. When John McLean died in 1916, he put the newspaper in trust, having little faith that his playboy son Edward "Ned" McLean could manage his inheritance. Ned went to court and broke the trust, but, under his management, the newspaper slumped toward ruin. Maya Graham period. The newspaper was purchased in a bankruptcy auction in 1933 by the former chairman of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, Eugene Meyer, who restored the newspaper's health and reputation. In 1946, Meyer was succeeded as publisher by his son-in-law, Philip Graham. In 1954, the newspaper consolidated its position by acquiring and merging with its last morning rival, the Washington Times-Herald. The merger left the Post with 2 remaining local competitors, the afternoon Washington Star and the Washington Daily News, which merged in 1972 and folded in 1981. The Washington Times, established in 1982 by a subsidiary of the Unification Church, led by the Rev. Sun Myung Moon, has been a local conservative rival with a circulation about 1/7 that of the Post. In the late 2000s, additional editorially conservative competition increased with the foundation of the tabloid, The Examiner, of Washington by the new owners of the old Hearst paper, the San Francisco Examiner, who engineered a swap trading the larger, more prosperous San Francisco Chronicle for the former Hearst flagship paper. They also started several other tabloid examiners in several American cities. including briefly for 2 years in Baltimore Examiner, going against the 170-year-old Baltimore Sun. After Phil Graham's death in 1963, control of the Washington Post company passed to Katharine Graham, his wife and mayor's daughter. Few women had run nationally prominent newspapers in the United States. Katharine Graham described her own anxiety and lack of confidence based on her gender in her autobiography. She served as publisher from 1969 to 1979 and headed the Washington Post company into the early 1990s as chairman of the board and CEO. After 1993, she retained a position as chairman of the executive committee until her death in 2001. Her tenure is credited with seeing the newspaper rise in national stature through effective investigative reporting after it began to live down its reputation as a house organ for the Kennedy and Johnson administration, working to ensure that the New York Times did not surpass its Washington reporting of the Pentagon Papers and Watergate scandal. During this time, Katharine Graham also oversaw the Post Company's diversification purchase of the for-profit education and training company Kaplan, Inc., for $40 million in 1984. 20 years later, Kaplan had surpassed the Post newspaper as the company's leading contributor to income, and by 2010 Kaplan accounted for more than 60% of the entire company revenue stream. Executive editor Ben Bradley, a Kennedy loyalist, put the newspaper's reputation and resources behind reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who, in a long series of articles, chipped away at the story behind the 1972 burglary of Democratic National Committee officers in the Watergate Hotel complex in Washington. The Post's dogged coverage of the story, the outcome of which ultimately played a major role in the resignation of President Richard Nixon, won the newspaper a Pulitzer Prize in 1973. In 1972, the Book World section was introduced with Pulitzer Prize-winning critic William McPherson as its first editor. It featured Pulitzer Prize-winning critics such as Jonathan Yardley and Michael Derder, the latter of whom established his career as a critic at the Post. In 2009, after 37 years, with great reader outcries and protest, the Washington Post Book World, as a standalone insert, was discontinued. The last issue being Sunday, February 15, 2009, along with a general reorganization of the paper, such as placing the Sunday editorials on the back page of the main front section rather than the Outlook section and distributing some other, locally oriented, op-ed, letters and commentaries in other sections. However, book reviews are still published in the Outlook section on Sundays and in the Style section the rest of the week, as well as online. In 1980, the newspaper published a dramatic story called Jimmy's World, describing the life of an 8-year-old heroin addict in Washington, for which reporter Janet Cook won acclaim and a Pulitzer Prize. Subsequent investigation, however, revealed the story to be a fabrication. The Pulitzer Prize was returned. Donald E. Graham, Katharine's son, succeeded her as publisher in 1979 and in the early 1990s became both chief executive officer and chairman of the board. He was succeeded in 2000 as publisher and CEO by Boyce Follett Jones, Jr., with Graham remaining as chairman. Katharine Graham Weymouth now serves as publisher and chief executive officer. Post-Graham period. In 1996, the newspaper established a website. In 2008, Marcus Brockler replaced longtime executive editor Leonard Downey, Jr., serving publisher Katharine Weymouth. In 2010, the newspaper cited its local focus as a reason for running its first ever front-page advertisement. The Capital One ad was being run to draw attention to the rebranding of Chevy Chase Bank, a bank Capital One bought in 2009. According to the Post's vice president of advertising, the page one advertisement is a very local, useful information for our readers type of campaign. In November 2012, Weymouth announced that Boston Globe editor Martin Barron would take over Broccoli's position on January 2, 2013. In 2013, the newspaper announced that it had plans to start charging frequent users of its website, with many exceptions. Jeff Bezos purchased the newspaper for $250 million in cash, completing the transaction on October 1, 2013. After announcing the planned acquisition on August 5, 2013, the newspaper is currently owned by Nash Holdings LLC, a holding company created for the acquisition and controlled by Bezos. The sale included El Tiempo Latino, the Fairfax Times, the Gazette, the Post-Express free daily newspaper, Southern Maryland newspapers, and several newspapers covering and for the U.S. Armed Forces. Nash Holdings also took ownership of the Post printing plants in Springfield, Virginia, Fairfax County, Virginia, and Laurel, Maryland. Other assets included in the sale were the publications Apartment Showcase, Capital Business, Fashion Washington, Guide to Retirement Living Sourcebook, New Condominium Guide, and New Homes Guide, the internet sites thecapitaldeal.com and serviceally.com, and Comprint military publications. Some real estate was also included in the deal, such as a one-story office building in St. Mary's County, Maryland, warehouses in Fairfax County, Virginia, 2 tracts of land in Fairfax County, Virginia, leased office space in Charles County, Maryland, and in Montgomery County, Maryland, and 23 acres of undeveloped land, Charles County, Maryland. Not included in the sale were other Washington Post Company assets, including the Washington Post Company's downtown office building, the Post's Robinson Terminal facilities in Alexandria, Virginia, Post Newsweek stations, Cable One, independent web-based media assets such as Slate Group, The Root, and Foreign Policy, social media marketing company Social Code, home healthcare and hospice provider Celtic Healthcare, and the energy parts supplier, Forney Corporation. After the completion of the sale, a press release announced the name change of the Washington Post Company to Graham Holdings Company. In early September 2013, Bezos summarized his approach for the news organization, with a vision that recreates the daily ritual of reading the Post as a bundle, not merely a series of individual stories, although he indicated that the experience was more likely to be created on tablet computers and less likely on the web. In August 2014, the Washington Post launched Get There, an online personal finance section. In September 2014, Jeff Bezos announced his decision to appoint Frederick J. Ryan Jr., founding president and CEO of Politico, to serve as publisher and CEO of the Washington Post, effective October 1, 2014. This signaled Bezos' intent to shift the Post to a more digital focus with a strategy for expanding to a broader national and global readership. Ryan has continued to invest in news and technology while reducing expenses in legacy print areas. Nash Holdings divested itself of a number of newspapers, and closed 2 others, in the summer of 2015. The company announced on June 12, 2015, that it would close the Montgomery Gazette and Prince George's Gazette effective June 18, 2015. The company also sold Comprint military publications and its Southern Maryland newspapers group to Adams Publishing Group. The company also said it would sell the Fairfax County Times to Whippet Media, a locally owned company founded by the Times' former general manager. Richard Whippen. In August 2014, the Post announced it will be moving into new headquarters space at 1 Franklin Square in December 2015. The company leased 242,000 square feet of space for 16 years on floors 4 through 9 in the West Tower and floors 7 and 8 in the East Tower. The building's owner agreed to an extensive build-out. Only about 10% of the space will be private offices, which required extensive demolition of interior walls and the removal of the walls on the 7th and 8th floor in the East Tower so they joined with the floors on the West Tower. The newly joined space will create two 60,000 square foot floors capable of accommodating 700 newsroom workers and software engineers. The build-out includes 4 sets for live television filming, a new staircase between the 7th and 8th floors in each tower, and a 2-story auditorium on the 4th floor. The building's south-facing facade will also be altered to give Post workers floor-to-ceiling windows.